Okay, well, I'm going to go through this pretty fast. This is a Chevy S-10, 1991, the first generation. The horn button no longer was working very well. Too much crud was built up in it. So you'll all recognize this horn button. It just pulls off the steering wheel. It just has these clips. You pull it off. There's one wire that's held on with this connector here. You pull that off and it can be difficult to get it off because GM put the little tit on it that goes into the little hole to make it hard to remove. And then what I did is I set this down and I painted marks on it and then took a picture of it so I'd know exactly how this went back together. It may or may not be important later, but if you don't do it at the beginning, you won't get a chance later. So you better mark stuff when you start. And then I've already taken this apart, but basically this whole metal button piece is inside this rubber piece, and it just goes under the lip. And to get it apart, you just roll this lip like this to unroll it off of this, and then this metal piece comes out. Now I've seen people drill the rivets out, and you can see the rivets in it. There's a rivet there, a rivet there, and a rivet there. And rivet's not really the right term. They were just plastic stalks that were then melted in order to put this thing together so it stayed together. I didn't want to take it apart because I didn't want to dig up a bunch of little tiny screws and put it back together, and I really didn't see much reason to take it apart. I have no interest in disassembling it and painting it or anything like that. So the way this works is those rivets are plastic, and it's hard to see, but this sandwich is three pieces. There's a thicker piece that my thumb is holding. There's a black plastic insulating piece, which the rivets are part of, and then there's the thin spring plate. When you squeeze this spring plate, you're squeezing that metal spring plate. You can see it move down, and it hits the other metal plate, and that completes the circuit. And so what gets wrong with these is it gets dirty in between those two plates, and when you squish it, you no longer make a good contact because of the dirt and oil, grease and dust and whatever else is in there. So here's what I did. I used a meter initially and hooked it to one of these fingers and to the other connector here, and I measured the resistance, and as expected, it was extremely high. You know, if you pushed hard enough and in the right place, you could sometimes get a reading low enough, and experienced it when it was installed in the truck. You could get it to where you could blow the horn. You had to push really hard and in just the right place. So it needed to be cleaned inside. So step one is to use contact cleaner. I bought this at Walmart. Contact cleaner, and you just spray the heck, try to get it inside between the two sandwich plates. It's best, you should wear gloves, really. You get it on your hands and you'll wind up seeing that white residue. So that was step one. I just to flush everything out. Step two was, while it was wet, and you might need to re-wet it while you're doing this, to move more of that dirt out, I took one of these Scotch sticky things and folded it in half, and folded it in half again, and then I slid it through these slots, and it's hard to do with one hand, but I slid it under and through the slot so it went between the two plates. So now it's on top of this plate, but in your imagination it's between the plates. And while the contact cleaner was in there, I worked this around from different slots on the side just to work the contact cleaner to initially get any oily gummy residue out, using this as kind of a cleaning brush. So did that, I took it out, sprayed it some more with a contact cleaner. And then the next step after that was to get some of this small sandpaper. This was 800 grit sandpaper, and tear off some pieces, you know, about this size. And you're doing the same thing. You're sliding this in these little openings so that you can get the sandpaper between the upper and lower plate. And then when it's in there, you put gentle finger pressure on the plates to make them rub a little bit against the sandpaper, and you work that sandpaper in and out, the upside, and then you turn it over and do it the other way. So you're cleaning both, you're sandpapering gently both sides of each of these plates where they're going to touch when you squeeze this. And then when I finished with that, I went back and flushed it again with the contact cleaner to, flush any grit out that might remain. And so that's what I did, and that really completes the fixing process. I'm not going to show it on video because, again, I only have two hands. After I did that, I reconnected my meter to the two connections on this plate and tested it. And I was getting, in most places, about 0.5 to 1.5 ohms, which should be fine for that relay clicking in when you have it back in the truck. And so that's what I did for this, to refurbish this horn button without getting carried away with disassembling it. So all that'll be necessary now to put this back together is I'll just put it back with the lines I made originally with the white tape, the white paint, stick it back in so the rubber part of the horn button's reconnected to the metal parts, and then reconnect the wire here that's on that little spring contact. That's what it goes to, the spring contact that's inside the steering wheel. And then snap it back on. One thing I would mention that I will also do, I will use some of that sandpaper, and I will sand on the inside here of these spring contacts to make sure that I get the rust off the area of these spring contacts that are gonna touch on the steering wheel. And if you really want to go crazy, you can take a piece of the sandpaper out to the steering wheel where these touch, and you can just gently run the sandpaper over the contact point on the steering wheel too to knock any rust off. And as I was putting this back together, initially I talked about I made those marks so I could get everything back in position. And what I discovered was Chevy had already thought of that. Inside the rubber, it's very hard to see. Try to get the light just right. You can see there's a nub right here molded into the rubber. So when everything goes back where these marks are, like that, this cutout in the metal, in that one spot, that cutout there, the cat's trying to help me. That cutout needs to go where that nub is. And if it doesn't, the nub will ride up on this metal edge, and then the rubber will not seat flat. And I discovered that after I got this together, and I was about 1/4 inch off of where that nub needed to be. So pay attention to that when you put it back together.